The mahogany boardroom table gleamed under soft recessed lighting, and I could see my own reflection in its polished surface. Small, insignificant, about to become smaller still. Leonard Hayes sat at the head of the table, like a king surveying his kingdom. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, not a thread out of place. His teeth were impossibly white, his smile sharp enough to draw blood. At 38, he'd spent the last 7 years cultivating an image of invincibility, and it had worked. Everyone in that room believed he was untouchable. Everyone except me. "You'll never be management material, Ryan," he said, his voice smooth as honey but laced with arsenic. "Maybe stick to the task you're good at." My coffee trembled in my hand. A few drops escaped the rim and splattered across my crisp notebook. The one I'd bought specifically for this meeting. The one where I'd hoped to take notes on my proposal. The one that was now destroyed just like everything else. Every eye in the room snapped toward me. Some curious, some pitying, most delighted by the scene unfolding before them. Jessica Hartwell, Leonard's executive assistant and his favorite puppet, leaned lightly against his shoulder. Her perfectly manicured fingers rested on his arm as she whispered something inaudible. They both laughed, soft, conspiratorial, cruel. I was 32 years old. I'd worked at Caldwell and Associates for 5 years. I'd logged countless sleepless nights on client calls, spent weekends refining presentations, stayed until midnight correcting errors that weren't mine to correct. I'd made Leonard look good more times than I could count. And in a single sentence, delivered in front of 15 colleagues, he'd erased all of it. My chest felt crushed. My throat tightened. Shame roared louder than my pulse. "I see," I said quietly, setting down my coffee with careful precision. I closed my ruined notebook and stood, maintaining eye contact with Leonard for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to show I wasn't broken. Short enough to leave before the cracks showed. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Jessica's giggle trailing behind me, a cruel hammer against my chest. Leonard's voice called out, "Ryan, wait." But I knew it was an apology. It was a command, another opportunity to assert dominance. I pretended not to hear and kept walking. Behind that closed boardroom door, I swore something silent to myself. Leonard Hayes will learn what it means to have underestimated me. The storm was beginning. I stumbled into the emergency stairwell, the heavy door slamming shut behind me with metallic echo. My forehead pressed against the cold steel railing, and I tried to catch my breath. My body shook, not from fear, but from rage and humiliation, a low, simmering fire that made my fingers tremble. I could still hear Leonard's laughter, Jessica's giggle, the subtle snickers from colleagues I consider friends. 5 years. 5 years. I stared down at the empty staircase, watching my distorted reflection in the dark glass panels of the emergency exit door. The man looking back at me was hollow, eyes too wide, jaw too tight, shoulders curved inward as though trying to disappear. In that moment, something shifted inside me, not impulsively, not in blind rage, but with the clarity that comes after humiliation has burned away every illusion. Leonard wasn't a genius. He was a narcissist, a man who'd built an empire on charm, favoritism, and the careful cultivation of fear. He gathered loyal followers like Jessica by making them feel special, chosen, while systematically destroying anyone who questioned him. He was a master manipulator, a conductor of chaos who thrived when others suffered. But every conductor has weaknesses, and I was about to find all of them. This wouldn't be a blind confrontation. This wouldn't be me storming back into that boardroom, shouting accusations that would get me fired. This would be something far more effective. It would be precise, patient, and perfectly timed. It would be justice delivered not in anger, but in truth. I pulled out my phone and opened a new notes app. At the top, I typed Leonard Hayes, observations. Then I added the first entry, boardroom, 2:47 p.m., public humiliation. Witness, Jessica Hartwell, 14 colleagues. Method, deliberate, calculated, narcissistic enjoyment visible. I took a breath, steadied myself, and walked back upstairs. The game had begun. That evening, I sat at my desk in my small apartment in Brooklyn, my laptop open to a blank document. The city hummed outside my window, Car horns, distant sirens, the rhythm of 8 million people living their lives. I felt oddly calm, despite the roiling emotions beneath the surface. I created a new folder on my desktop, Evidence. Inside it, I started cataloging everything I could remember about Leonard's management style. Not just what I'd witnessed today, but the accumulated cruelties of 5 years. His favoritism system. Chosen employees received praise, easy projects, and implied promises of promotion. Everyone else received scrutiny, impossible deadlines, and public critique. His gaslighting tactics. He would assign a project, then deny having done so. He would praise work in private, then mock it in public. He would reframe failures as intentional to test loyalty. His relationship with Jessica. She'd arrived at the company as a temp 2 years ago. Within 6 months, she'd become his right hand. Within a year, rumors of an affair had started circulating. Leonard never confirmed or denied. He just smiled when people whispered. His treatment of underperformers. Once Leonard decided you weren't his type, you were finished. He'd isolate you, humiliate you, make your life miserable until you quit. I thought of Marcy Chun, the quiet analyst who sat 2 cubicles away from me. She'd made a single mistake on a report 3 months ago. Leonard had never let her forget it. Every meeting, he'd reference her reliability issues. She'd started avoiding eye contact with him. Her shoulders had curved inward, just like mine had in the stairwell. I thought of David Park, who'd quit last month after Leonard publicly questioned his competence in front of clients. I thought of the unnamed junior intern who'd cried in the bathroom after Leonard mocked her formatting choices. They weren't my responsibility to fix, but Leonard was. I pulled up my work email and began a careful review of every exchange I'd had with Leonard over the past 5 years. I started collecting screenshots, organizing them by date. I noted patterns in his language, his contradictions, his cruelties. Then I did something that would take most of the night. I created a master timeline of every major project Leonard had taken credit for, cross-referencing them with who'd actually done the work. By 3 a.m, I had the skeleton of something powerful. I didn't know exactly how I'd use it yet, but I knew I would. I saved the folder with a new name, The Truth. Monday morning came cold and gray. I arrived at the office at 7:15 a.m., before anyone else. The place was quiet, just the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sound of the city waking up outside. I made myself coffee and sat at my desk, observing. By 7:45 a.m., the first employees trickled in. By 8:30 a.m., the office was moderately full. By 9 a.m., Leonard arrived, not before Jessica as I'd expected, but with her, walking side by side, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. I watched without watching. I typed emails, responded to messages, looked like I was working, but I was cataloging everything. The tilt of Leonard's head when a favorite employee approached him, that slight upturn of his chin, the smile that showed just enough teeth, the coldness in his eyes when someone he decided was difficult passed his office, the way he whispered to Jessica, his hand sometimes touching her lower back. Over the next week, I noticed the pattern more clearly. Tuesdays at 3 p.m., Leonard held performance reviews with select employees. I noticed the chosen ones leaving his office glowing, talking about exciting new projects. I noticed others, like Marcy, going in and emerging with slumped shoulders. Wednesdays at lunch, Leonard took Jessica to the coffee place on the corner. They'd return 40 minutes later, always laughing, always touching. It wasn't subtle. Everyone in the office noticed. Most pretended not to care. Thursdays in the afternoon, Leonard held team meetings where he'd praise specific people while criticizing others. The language was insidious. He'd call criticism constructive feedback and praise recognition of exceptional work. But the real message was clear. Some people mattered and others didn't. Fridays before 5 p.m., Leonard left early, always with Jessica. They'd head toward the parking garage together, sometimes in his car, sometimes in hers. I documented it all in my evidence folder. Dates, times, names of witnesses, details of what was said. By Friday of week 2, I had enough to see the full picture. Leonard wasn't just cruel, he was methodical. His narcissism wasn't random. It was a carefully choreographed performance, refined over years, designed to make certain people feel special while making others feel invisible. And I was about to use his own choreography against him. That's when I did something that might have seemed minor to anyone watching, but it was the first thread I'd pull. Marcy had been assigned a client analysis project, a high-visibility assignment that could either launch her career or destroy it, depending on how Leonard decided to frame the results. I watched her hunched over her desk, brow furrowed, clearly stressed. I listened as Leonard walked by, pausing just long enough to say, "Remember, Marcy, this is your chance to prove you're not just deadwood around here." It wasn't exaggeration or a cruel joke. It was deliberate psychological warfare. That evening, I stayed late. I walked past her cubicle and saw the draft of her analysis. It was thorough, well-researched, competent, but it needed refinement. I didn't volunteer to help. I didn't announce anything to Leonard or Jessica. I simply left a note on her desk. "Hi, Marcy. Notice you're working on the Harrington analysis. I found some additional market data that might strengthen your conclusions. Check my email sent 6:47 p.m. Good work so far. Ryan." I'd attached 3 sources she hadn't found, along with a brief note showing how they could be incorporated. Nothing revolutionary, just helpful. The next day, Marcy approached my desk, eyes bright with gratitude. "Ryan, thank you so much. This information really elevated the whole analysis." I smiled. That's what colleagues are for. She nodded, grateful, and walked back to her desk. From across the office, I saw Jessica notice the interaction. I saw her lean toward Leonard and whisper something. I saw Leonard's eyes find me for a moment, that same cold glint appearing. But he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just registered that I'd stepped slightly out of line. That was exactly what I wanted. It was late Friday afternoon when my inbox chimed with an email marked urgent, personal, confidential. I almost didn't open it. But the sender was Leonard and the subject line read, "Weekend plans. Do not forward." I knew immediately what had happened. It was a misdirected email, meant for Jessica, sent to me by mistake. These things happen occasionally in busy offices. Most people would delete it out of courtesy. I opened it. "Jess, can't wait for tomorrow. Book the Marriott like we discussed. Tell your sister the cover story is set. You're staying with her Saturday night, right?" Winky face. The office thinks we're just having an affair, but they have no idea about the Cayman account or the client funds we've been moving. LOL. Safe to talk more Monday. 1 year and we're out. Leonard. My hands went numb. Not just an affair. That was expected, assumed, almost tolerated in the twisted power dynamics of the office. But this was something else entirely. This was fraud. This was embezzlement. This was criminal activity, documented in writing. I read it 3 more times to make sure I wasn't misreading. Then I did something crucial. I took a screenshot before Leonard realized his mistake and sent a recall notice. I backed it up to my encrypted personal cloud storage. I added it to my The Truth folder with a timestamp. By Monday morning, Leonard had definitely discovered the error. He'd sent out a recall notice Friday evening, which I'd ignored, but the email had been in my inbox for 3 hours. Long enough to save. Long enough to document. My heart raced, but my hand stayed steady. This was bigger than workplace cruelty now. This was real crime. And I was in possession of evidence. I didn't need to use it immediately. I just needed to know it was there. I started very carefully to build relationships with people Leonard had discarded. It started with Marcy. Her analysis had gone well. And when Leonard presented it to senior management, I watched him take full credit for her research. Marcy's face fell. I saw her realize what had happened. Over lunch at the coffee place the next day, I said to her, "Your work on that analysis was solid, really solid. I hope you know that, regardless of how it was presented." She looked up from her sandwich, eyes wet. He didn't even mention me. "I noticed," I said quietly, "and so did I." I didn't mention that I'd overheard 3 senior managers specifically asking whose analysis they'd been looking at. I didn't mention that I'd subtly corrected that misconception when I had the chance. I just offered solidarity. Over the next week, I did the same with 3 other people Leonard had hurt. David's replacement, a junior analyst named Tom who'd made one mistake and never recovered in Leonard's eyes. Sarah from accounting, who'd questioned one of Leonard's expense reports and had been coldly sidelined ever since. And James, a talented designer who joined the company with high hopes only to have them crushed under Leonard's criticism. I didn't recruit them. I didn't tell them I had a plan. I just showed them kindness. I listened to their stories. I acknowledged their hurt. I helped where I could without drawing attention. By the end of week 5, there were 5 of us who quietly understood that Leonard wasn't what he pretended to be. 5 people was enough to start with. At home that weekend, I organized everything I collected into a comprehensive file. I created a detailed timeline, cross-referenced with evidence. 2018, Leonard promoted to regional manager. Immediately began implementing favoritism system. 2019, first complaints to HR about unfair treatment. HR director was close friends with Leonard. Complaints went nowhere. 2020, Jessica hired as temp. Promoted to executive assistant within 6 months despite having no relevant experience. 2021, multiple employees quit after citing hostile work environment. Leonard spun the narrative as people not being cut out for real business. 2022, rumored affair between Leonard and Jessica begins. No one reports officially. It would be fruitless, and they fear retaliation. This year, misdirected email reveals embezzlement scheme involving client funds being moved to offshore accounts. I had emails. I had screenshots. I had witness accounts, mental notes of what people had told me. I had my own observations. And I had a smoking gun. That email containing explicit discussion of fraud. But I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed one more thing. I needed Leonard to make another mistake. A public one. One that would make him vulnerable. I also needed to figure out the Cayman account situation. That email had mentioned moving client funds. That meant the company itself was at risk. That meant other people, innocent people, could be hurt. I spent Sunday night researching financial fraud, embezzlement, and corporate crime. I read about whistleblower protections. I looked into the company's structure and who actually had authority over financial decisions. By midnight, I had a new plan forming, not just to bring Leonard down, but to do it in a way that protected the company, protected the people who worked here, and exposed the full scope of what he'd been doing. I saved everything to an encrypted folder, then went to bed. Tomorrow I will begin phase 2. It started with a simple team meeting. Leonard had called everyone together for a Q3 performance review. He stood at the front of the conference room, perfectly pressed, perfectly confident, that familiar golden smile in place. We've had an excellent quarter, he announced. I want to recognize some individuals who've really stepped up. He proceeded to list names, his favorites, his chosen ones. People got promotions, bonuses, new titles. The system was working exactly as it always had. Then he said, and I want to acknowledge the work of our entire team, of course. Some of you are still finding your footing here at Caldwell and Associates. It takes time to develop the kind of excellence that separates the good from the exceptional. He was looking directly at Marcy when he said it. I watched her flinch. I watched her try to disappear into her chair. That's when I stood up. Actually, Leonard, I'd like to clarify something. I said, my voice steady and calm. Marcy's analysis for the Harrington Project? That wasn't just good work. That was exceptional work. It included market research that exceeded the original scope and showed genuine strategic insight. I think the team should know that. The room went silent. Leonard's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or the first recognition that I'd crossed an invisible line. Ryan, he said, his tone still honey-sweet, but with an edge now. Marcy certainly performed well on that project. It was a team effort, of course. I agreed, but I think it's important to recognize individual contributions. That's how people know their work matters. I sat back down. The meeting continued, but something had shifted. I could feel in the room. People were looking at Marcy differently. People were looking at me differently. And Leonard was very still, very controlled, very aware that he'd been challenged. After the meeting, As people filtered out, Jessica stopped me in the hallway. Her face was cold in a way I'd never seen before. "Leonard doesn't like being contradicted," she said quietly. "I noticed." I replied, "I'm sure he'll survive the trauma." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She just turned and walked away. I knew I'd made myself Leonard's enemy, but I'd also made myself visible. And that was crucial, because invisibility was over. It was time to start building something new. Monday morning brought unexpected news. An all-hands meeting was called for 10 a.m. When we gathered in the main conference room, I noticed someone I'd never seen before, a man in his mid-50s, sharp-eyed, with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. He stood beside the company's founder, David Caldwell, no relation to me, despite the shared surname. "I want to introduce Marcus Chun," David announced. "Marcus has accepted the position of Chief Operating Officer and will be taking over oversight of all regional operations, including this office." Marcus stepped forward. His eyes swept across the room, analytical, assessing, intelligent. "I know many of you are wondering why corporate is making this change," he said. His voice was quiet but commanded attention. "The short answer is that we've identified some structural issues with our current management approach. We're implementing new oversight protocols, increased transparency in project management, and revised compensation practices. Some people will find this refreshing. Others might find it challenging. Either way, it's happening." He looked directly at Leonard, then away. "I'll be spending the next 2 weeks here in the office, observing operations, getting to know the team. I'll be conducting individual interviews with all senior staff, starting with our regional manager." As people filed out of the meeting, whispering, I felt a strange sense of fate shifting. I didn't know who Marcus Chun was, but I had the distinct feeling that his arrival was about to change everything. Later that afternoon, I received an email. "Ryan Caldwell, I'd like to speak with you about the Harrington project. Can you meet me at 3 p.m.? Marcus Chun." I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I replied, "Of course. I'll bring my notes. RC." At 3 p.m., I walked into Marcus Chen's temporary office, the small conference room Leonard usually reserved for important calls. Marcus was reviewing documents on his laptop. He looked up as I entered, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit," he said. "Tell me about the Harrington analysis." I did. I explained the scope, the research, the strategic value. I carefully gave credit to Marcy for the original work, then explained my role in supplementary research. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he said, "And Leonard presented this to senior management?" "He did." I confirmed. "Giving you credit?" Marcus asked. "No," I said simply. "He presented it as his own strategic initiative." Marcus nodded slowly. "I see. And how common is that, in your experience?" I chose my words carefully. "It's the pattern I've observed in the 5 years I've worked here. Strong individual contributions often get credited to Leonard. The people doing the work rarely receive acknowledgement. That would create an incentive problem." Marcus said thoughtfully, "If people don't get credit for good work, they become less motivated to do good work." "Exactly," I said. Marcus closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "How long have you been unhappy working for Leonard Hayes?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that I hesitated. But something in Marcus's expression told me this was a test of honesty. 5 years, I admitted, but I've only recently decided to stop accepting it. Marcus nodded, as if I confirmed something he already suspected. "Tell me about the Cayman account," he said. My blood went cold. "I'm sorry. I managed." "The Cayman account," Marcus repeated. "I spent the last week reviewing financial discrepancies in this office's reports. There are regular transfers, small amounts, consistent, but enough that they add up. Transfers out of our standard operating accounts to a third-party bank in the Cayman Islands. If I had to guess, I'd say Leonard Hayes and Jessica Hartwell are moving company money somewhere it's not supposed to go, and I guess that you might have evidence of that." I stared at him. "How did you?" "Because that's exactly what I was sent here to investigate." Marcus said, Corporate got an anonymous tip 3 weeks ago about financial impropriety in this office. Corporate sent me to verify, and now I'm asking you, do you have evidence? I made a decision in that moment, a decision that would change everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small USB drive. I placed it on the table between us. Everything is on there, I said. The misdirected email, screenshots, documentation of the pattern. I don't have access to the financial records. I'm not in accounting, but this is everything I do have. Marcus picked up the USB drive and examined it. Why are you giving this to me? Because, I said carefully, I don't want revenge. I want justice. And more than that, I want this company and the people who work here to be protected from what Leonard is doing. Marcus studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. This was smart work, he said, and brave. It also puts you in a precarious position. Leonard is going to know that this investigation is happening. He's going to know it came from someone inside, and he's going to suspect you. I know, I said. Are you prepared for that? Yes, I said, and I meant it. Marcus stood up and extended his hand. Then here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to your desk and do your job normally. Don't act differently. Don't avoid Leonard. Just be yourself. By the end of this week, we'll have verified the financial crimes. By next week, we'll have presented our findings to corporate. And by the week after, this will all be over. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of what I just set in motion. It was the strangest week of my professional life. Nothing changed visibly, but everything changed underneath. Marcus spent hours in meetings with accounting. He requested detailed financial records going back 3 years. He requested audits of all major project expenditures. And most importantly, he had a quiet conversation with David Caldwell, the company founder. That lasted over 2 hours. Leonard, meanwhile, was on high alert. I could see it in the way his eyes tracked people moving through the office. I could see it in the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers would drum against his desk when he thought no one was looking. He hadn't explicitly confronted me, but the atmosphere around him had shifted. It was like standing near a thunderstorm. You could feel the electricity in the air, the pressure building. On Wednesday, he called me into his office. Close the door, he said. I did, even though I didn't want to. Being alone with him made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to remain calm. I want to talk about your recent attitude, Leonard said, leaning back in his chair. You've been rather vocal lately, in meetings with your colleagues. It's unusual for you. I'm just speaking up more. I said evenly. Is that a problem? It's a problem if it's making people uncomfortable, he said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I've always seen you as a solid worker, Ryan, reliable, quiet, easy to manage. But lately, you seem to have developed opinions about how things should be run here. Opinions that contradict my leadership. I'm just acknowledging good work when I see it. I said, good work is my responsibility to acknowledge, Leonard corrected. His voice was still smooth, but the venom was clear now. I'm the regional manager. I decide who gets credit, who gets promoted, who gets to stay. Not you. I understand that, I said. Do you? He asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've forgotten your place. You're making me wonder if you're actually a good fit for this company anymore. The threat hung in the air between us. Is that a warning? I asked carefully. It's a reality check, Leonard said. I'm being nice about it now, because I've always thought you had potential. But there are limits to my patience, and you're approaching those limits. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. Noted, I said, is there anything else? Just keep that in mind, Leonard said, turning back to his computer. You're dismissed. I stood and walked out, my heart pounding, but my face calm. I knew he was scared. That's why he was threatening me now, because he could sense something shifting, something he couldn't quite control anymore. By Friday afternoon, I knew why. It started with a meeting called for 9 a.m. on Friday. Senior staff only. Leonard, Jessica, David Caldwell, Marcus Chin, and the company's chief financial officer. I wasn't called in. None of the regular employees were. But the conference room was in view of my desk, and I watched as they filed in, closing the door behind them. Through the glass walls, I could see Marcus presenting documents. I could see David's expression shifting from concern to angry. I could see Leonard's face going pale. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. When the door opened, Leonard wasn't with them. David and the CFO left immediately. Marcus appeared a few minutes later and made his way through the office, stopping at various desks, speaking quietly with people, especially Marcy, Tom, Sarah, and James, the people Leonard had hurt. Then he came to my desk. "Can you come with me?" he asked. I followed him back to the conference room. Inside, 3 chairs were arranged around a small table. We sat down. Leonard Hayes is being placed on immediate administrative leave pending a formal investigation. Marcus said, "The investigation will focus on alleged embezzlement and financial impropriety. Jessica Hartwell is being terminated effective immediately for her role in the scheme. The company is cooperating fully with law enforcement." I felt something release inside my chest, a tension I've been carrying for weeks. "What about his position?" I asked. "That's what I want to discuss with you," Marcus said. "David and I have reviewed your work over the past few weeks. We've looked at the Harrington Project, your contributions to other initiatives, your ability to recognize and develop talent in others. We've also reviewed the historical record of projects you've contributed to." He paused, letting that sink in. Leonard Hayes built his reputation on taking credit for work he didn't do. Marcus continued. "A lot of that work was yours. Your strategic thinking, your attention to detail, your ability to maintain quality under pressure. Those are the things that made Leonard look good. Now, I'd like to know, are you interested in being promoted to senior project manager? The position would include oversight of mid-level projects, team leadership, and direct reporting to me." I stared at him. "This isn't pity," Marcus said, reading my hesitation. "This isn't compensation for what Leonard did. This is recognition of your actual talent, which you've been hiding under the guise of being invisible. The question is, do you want the position?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, I do." Marcus smiled. "Good. You start in your new role on Monday. We'll announce it to the office after the Leonard situation has been publicly addressed." The story broke on Monday morning. Not from us. From the FBI, which had been called in to investigate the embezzlement scheme. The headlines were brutal. Local company exec arrested in $2.30 million embezzlement scheme, and Caldwell and Associates uncovered for systemic fraud. The article detailed how Leonard and Jessica had been systematically moving client funds to offshore accounts for over a year. It mentioned the investigation that had uncovered the scheme. It quoted David Caldwell as saying the company was implementing new financial oversight procedures and was cooperating fully with law enforcement. It did not mention me. That was Marcus's doing, I realized. He protected my anonymity even as the investigation proceeded. By midday Friday, the office was abuzz with shock and speculation. People gathered in clusters, whispering, trying to make sense of what had happened. David called another all-hands meeting at 2 p.m. "I know many of you are confused and upset by recent events," he said, his voice grave. "I want to be clear. Leonard Hayes violated the trust that we place in him. He violated the law. He will face the consequences of his actions. What he did does not reflect the values of this company or the integrity of the people who work here." He paused. "Effective immediately, we're implementing new management structures. Marcus Chin will be overseeing all regional operations. We're hiring an external audit firm to review the past 3 years of finances. And we're promoting Ryan Caldwell to Senior Project Manager effective today. Ryan will be leading our project management division and will report directly to Marcus." Every head in the office turned toward me. I stood up, walked in front of the room, and shook David's hand. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded, acknowledging the moment, and then took my place beside Marcus. From my new vantage point at the front of the office, I could see people's reactions. Marcy's face lit up with genuine happiness. Tom looked stunned but pleased. Sarah gave me a subtle thumbs up. James smiled. And in the back of the room, I saw people who'd been loyal to Leonard beginning to distance themselves, suddenly aware that they'd backed the wrong horse. The balance of power had shifted. My first week as senior project manager was disorienting. I had an actual office now, a small one, but it was mine. I had direct authority over 4 project managers and a team of 12 analysts. I had a budget. I had responsibility. I also had a new problem. People were treating me differently. Some with respect, which was nice. Some with resentment, which was expected. Some with false friendship, which was the worst. I held my first team meeting on Thursday. I want to be clear about something. I told a room of people who'd either worked under Leonard or who were new to my team. I got this position because I did good work that wasn't recognized before. That's not a secret anymore. Everyone knows what Leonard did. But I didn't get this position as revenge. I got it because I have ideas about how projects should be managed. Ideas about giving credit where it's due. About recognizing individual contributions. About making sure talented people aren't invisible. I looked around the room. If you've been hurt by the old system, this is a new system. If you benefited from the old system and think you can continue that way here, you should know now. It doesn't work that way with me. Everyone gets credit for their work. Everyone gets evaluated fairly. Everyone has a voice. I paused. That said, I expect excellent work. I expect professionalism. I expect the same dedication that you would give to any manager you respected. In return, I'll give you fairness, transparency, and recognition. Can you all live with that? Everyone nodded. Even the people who looked uncertain seemed willing to try. By the end of my 3rd month in the position, the office had transformed. The Harrington project had expanded significantly. We'd landed 2 additional clients based on the strength of that initial work. Marcy had been promoted to project lead on one of them. Tom had developed an innovative reporting system that made client communication clearer and more efficient. Sarah had identified potential cost-saving measures that had earned her a special commendation from David. People were doing better work because they weren't living in fear. Meanwhile, Leonard's trial date was set for early next year. The FBI had accumulated overwhelming evidence. The offshore accounts, the fraudulent transfers, the emails documenting the scheme, Jessica's testimony in exchange for a plea deal. Jessica had turned state's evidence almost immediately. Facing 10 years in prison, she'd agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony implicated Leonard in not just embezzlement, but in other financial improprieties, kickbacks to vendors, fraudulent billing on client projects, things that went back years. One afternoon in late November, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "You won." Inside, a single line, "But some of us think about what you did every single day. Jay." I knew it was from Jessica. She was out on bail, awaiting sentencing. She was unemployable. Her professional reputation destroyed. Her complicity in Leonard's crimes meant that no one would touch her. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. That evening, I sat in my small apartment and thought about what victory actually felt like. It wasn't what I'd expected. There was satisfaction, yes. There was justice, absolutely. But there was also something more complicated, a weight of responsibility. Because I hadn't just taken Leonard down. I'd taken over his position. I was now part of the management structure that had enabled him to flourish. That meant I had to be better. I had to prove that leadership didn't require cruelty. That excellence didn't demand the crushing of others. It meant I couldn't become him. By December, the office had fully shifted into a new paradigm. We'd implemented Marcus's new management protocols. Transparent project assignments, clear evaluation criteria, regular feedback sessions. People knew where they stood and why. Credit was given publicly. Mistakes were addressed constructively rather than punitively. Productivity was up 34%. Turnover had dropped to nearly zero. David Caldwell called me into his office just before Christmas. "I wanted to show you something," he said, opening his laptop. On the screen was the company's year-end financial report. Beneath the typical metrics, there was a new line item, Employee Satisfaction Survey. 87% positive, up from 51% last year. "That's you," David said. "Looking at me, that's the difference you made in 9 months." "It's the team," I corrected. "I just created an environment where they could do their best work." "Exactly," David said. "That's what good leadership looks like. Leonard created an environment where people were afraid. You created an environment where people thrive. The numbers reflect that. He closed the laptop. I'm telling you this because I want you to know something. I was wrong. When I promoted Leonard, I thought charisma and confidence were what we needed. I didn't see that he was toxic until it was almost too late. I'm grateful that someone with integrity caught it before the damage became irreparable. I'm grateful you listened. I said, I almost didn't, David admitted. If Marcus hadn't come in with the audit, if he hadn't discovered the financial crimes, I might have just moved Leonard to a different department. You might have been ignored completely. He looked at me seriously. That's the scariest part of my job, he said, knowing that I almost missed this, almost protected a predator, instead of holding him accountable. So from now on, I'm going to be more careful about who I promote and why. And I'm going to pay more attention to the voices like yours, the quiet ones saying something's wrong. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. In January, I received a formal letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They were calling me to testify in Leonard's trial. My evidence, my documentation, my careful observation, all of it would be presented in court. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I spent 3 days on the witness stand, walking through every piece of evidence I had collected, every conversation I'd overheard, every pattern I'd observed. Leonard's defense attorney tried to discredit me, suggesting I was biased, that my evidence was circumstantial, that I had a personal vendetta. But the evidence was solid. The other witnesses corroborated my account. And most damning of all, Jessica's testimony painted a clear picture of deliberate, systematic fraud with Leonard as the orchestrator. On a cold February morning, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all counts. Leonard Hayes was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. As the bailiff led him out of the courtroom, he looked directly at me. His expression held no anger, no recognition really, just a hollow look of a man whose carefully constructed world had finally collapsed. I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no gloating. Just a quiet sense of closure. Justice had been served, not because I destroyed him, but because I told the truth. 6 months after the trial, the office held a quiet celebration, not for Leonard's conviction. That felt wrong, somehow, despite everything, but for the completion of the Harrington project, which had exceeded all expectations. The client was so pleased that they commissioned a second, larger project, one that would secure the company's growth for the next year. David invited me, Marcus, Marcy, Tom, Sarah, James, and a few others who'd been central to the project's success out for dinner. As we sat around a large table at a restaurant overlooking the city, someone raised a glass. To new beginnings, the person said. We all drank to that. Later, as the evening was winding down, Marcus pulled me aside. I want to tell you something, he said. When I came to this office to investigate Leonard, I expected to find a simple case of fraud. I expected to find evidence and move on. What I didn't expect to find was someone like you. What do you mean? I asked. Most people, when they're hurt the way Leonard hurt you, they want revenge, Marcus said. They want to see the person burn. They want to watch them suffer. But you wanted justice. You wanted to protect other people. You wanted to make the system better. That's rare. I'm not some saint, I said. I was angry. I wanted him to pay. I know, Marcus said, but you channeled that anger into something productive. You didn't lash out. You didn't make accusations without evidence. You built a case methodically, carefully, and you presented it to the right people in the right way. That takes wisdom, not just anger. I didn't know what to say to that. The point is, Marcus continued, you could have stopped at getting your promotion. You could have been satisfied with Leonard's downfall. But you didn't. You've been working to transform this entire office. You've been mentoring people. You've been building something better. That's the mark of someone who's actually learned something from their suffering. After he walked away, I sat with that for a while. Had I learned something from my suffering? Or was I just someone who'd been dealt a bad hand and managed to flip it to my advantage? I thought about the version of me from 9 months ago, the version who'd sworn revenge in a stairwell. That Ryan would have been satisfied with Leonard going to prison. That Ryan would have gloated and felt vindicated. But I wasn't that Ryan anymore. Somewhere in the process of building the case, of documenting the truth, of helping other people stand up and speak, I'd changed. The anger that had driven me initially had been transformed into something else. A commitment to doing things the right way. That was the real victory, I realized. Not that Leonard had fallen, but that I hadn't become him in the process of taking him down. By May, I'd taken on an official mentoring role for junior staff. One afternoon, a young analyst named Christopher came to my office, looking troubled. I need advice, he said. My manager, he's not treating me fairly. He takes credit for my ideas. He criticizes me publicly but praises other people privately. I feel like I'm going crazy because no one else seems to notice. I recognize a pattern immediately. It was different manager, different context, but the same fundamental problem. A person in power abusing that power, making someone else feel invisible and worthless. Sit down, I said. I want to tell you a story. I told him about Leonard, about the humiliation in the boardroom, about those weeks in the stairwell where I'd felt like I was drowning, about the temptation to lash out blindly, to fight back irrationally. But I didn't, I said, because I realized something. People like your manager, people who gain power through manipulation and cruelty, they have a specific weakness. They're narcissists. They believe they're untouchable. They believe their version of reality is the truth. And because of that, they're careless. They leave evidence. They make mistakes. So what did you do? Christopher asked. I documented everything. I said, calmly, professionally, without emotion. I didn't confront him. I didn't fight back publicly. I just gathered facts. And then I presented those facts to the right people, people with actual authority to make changes. Did it work? He asked. It did, I said. But here's what I want you to understand. It worked because I did it the right way. If I had come in with accusations and emotion, it would have been dismissed as a personal conflict. But facts are hard to argue with. I leaned back in my chair. I'm not telling you to do what I did. I continued. Every situation is different. But I am telling you this. Don't let someone else's cruelty turn you into a cruel person. Don't let their manipulation teach you how to manipulate. Rise above it. Document it. Speak truth. And let the truth do the work. Christopher nodded slowly. Thank you, he said. I needed to hear that. After he left, I realized something. I just passed on the most important lesson I'd learned. Not how to get revenge, but how to seek justice without sacrificing your own integrity in the process. Exactly 1 year after Leonard had humiliated me in that boardroom, I stood in front of the same room, making a very different kind of presentation. This time, I wasn't defending my competence. I was announcing it. The Harrington Project had generated $4.2 million in revenue for the company. My team's work had expanded our client base by 38%. The company's employee satisfaction metrics had risen from 51% to 89%. And I wasn't standing there alone. Marcy stood beside me, presenting the client retention strategies she developed. Tom presented the reporting system he'd created. Sarah discussed the cost-saving initiatives. James showed the design innovations that had impressed our largest client. This wasn't about me. This was about a team, given fair treatment and recognition, doing exceptional work. 1 year ago, David Caldwell said, opening the formal meeting, this company was operating under toxic management. We have since made significant changes. We have held those responsible for criminal activity accountable under the law. We have restructured our management practices. And we have seen the results. Better performance, better culture, better outcomes for everyone involved. He looked directly at me. Ryan Caldwell, you've been instrumental in that transformation. You've not just done excellent work. You've created an environment where others can do excellent work. That's the definition of great leadership. As people applauded, I thought back to that moment in the stairwell 12 months ago. That Ryan had been drowning in rage and humiliation. He'd felt powerless and invisible. I wasn't invisible anymore. But more importantly, I'd learned that invisibility itself had been my strength. By moving quietly, by documenting rather than accusing, by building a case rather than fighting a battle, I'd won something far more valuable than revenge. I'd won justice. I'd won respect. I'd won my own dignity back. And in the process, I'd helped build something better. The office had fully transformed by year 2. Leonard was 2 years into his 8-year sentence. Jessica had been released after serving 18 months and had moved out of state, away from everyone who remembered her complicity. Marcus had been promoted to vice president of operations for the entire company. David had restructured his leadership team to include more diverse voices and backgrounds. The company had won industry awards for both innovation and workplace culture. And me? I'd been promoted to director of operations for the regional office. I had a larger team, larger projects, and larger responsibilities. But the thing I was most proud of wasn't on my resume. It was the fact that the office now had 5 junior staff members who come to me with stories similar to mine. Stories of being treated unfairly, doubted, dismissed. And for each of them, I'd given the same advice I'd learned through my own struggle. Document. Present facts to the right people. Seek justice, not revenge. And never let someone else's cruelty turn you into a cruel person. 2 of them had successfully documented their managers' misconduct and had those managers removed. 2 others had transferred to different departments where they thrived. One had started their own company, inspired by seeing what was possible when integrity and hard work aligned. On my office wall, I kept a photo from that first Harrington Project celebration. In it, I'm standing with Marcy, Tom, Sarah, and James. We're all smiling, genuinely. Not the forced smile of people celebrating survival, but the authentic smile of people celebrating excellence. Some days, when I was stressed or facing difficult decisions, I'd look at that photo and remember, this is what it looks like when people are allowed to thrive. This is what happens when you create space for people to do their best work. This is what justice looks like. Not someone else's suffering, but someone else's success. The saddest thing about Leonard's fall wasn't that he'd gone to prison. It was that he'd never understand the lesson his own failure taught. That true power doesn't come from fear or manipulation or taking credit. It comes from lifting others up, from creating space for excellence, from treating people with dignity. He'd had the position. He'd had the authority. He could have been extraordinary. Instead, he'd chosen cruelty. I chose differently. And that choice changed everything. I learned something in that stairwell 10 years ago, something I wish someone had told me before Leonard broke me. Respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't determined by who sat at the table with me, who took credit for my work, or who my boss believed deserved to matter. When I finally understood that silence could be a weapon and patience could be power, everything changed. I didn't destroy Leonard with rage. I disarmed him with truth. If you're still here, you've probably been gaslit into invisibility too. Someone made you doubt yourself. Someone made you feel small. Someone convinced you that speaking up makes you difficult, that setting boundaries makes you demanding, that surviving makes you ungrateful. They lied. Your silence doesn't make you weak. It makes you strategic. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. They make you whole. Your survival makes you extraordinary. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because your story matters. Share this with someone who's been invisible, someone who's forgotten their own worth. Tell them the revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. Your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. And now it's time to claim it.